Gears of War is one of the most influential games in history. It popularized an entire genre of games, the third-person cover-based shooter, and it is responsible for the wave of them in the 2000s and 2010s. Many iconic franchises such as Uncharted, Mass Effect, Ghost Recon, The Division, and so on would not be what they are today without Gears of War. Beyond its impact on game design, Gears of War is an iconic franchise in its own right. When someone mentions Xbox, the very first games that come to mind are always Halo and Gears of War. The game has left such an enduring legacy that it has received not only one remaster, but two of them. It's the true definition of a generational game. Now, almost 20 years later, we're going to dive back into the original Gears of War and see why it is such a masterpiece. There is far more to Gears of War than its game mechanics. The world building and the characters are also standouts. Despite its bombastic exterior, Gears of War has a very meticulous way of setting up its story. Gears of War doesn't set up a single story, but an entire trilogy. Together, these elements create a rich experience that is cohesive in a way that few games are, and it's an experience that is somehow more than the sum of its parts. So we're going to dive into the world, the story, and the gameplay, and we're going to see how each of these parts reinforce each other. Equip your Lancer gear, because we're diving in. The story opens with the chapter card. Ashes, 14 years after E-Day. Already, we see the game establishing elements of the world. We know there was some inciting incident E-Day that happened more than a decade ago. Dom releases our main character, Marcus Phoenix, from his prison cell.
What are you doing here?
Getting you out. Here, put this on. You'll need it.
You could get into a lot of trouble for doing this.
Not anymore. Things have changed. We better go.
What about the other prisoners? We can't just leave them here.
They're gone. Hoffman pardoned everybody.
Is that right?
Welcome back to the army, soldier.
This intro is striking, and it does a great job of piquing the player's curiosity. We're left to wonder why exactly Marcus is in prison. There is a backstory to unravel here. Likewise, his release stresses the direness of the situation. Why would you resort to getting help from a prisoner if you had anyone else you could call upon? Dom and Marcus make their way through the prison. Along the way, they stumble across horrors.
Nice.
What the hell's been going on in this prison?
You don't want to know.
This scene does a great job of setting up the tone and atmosphere of the story. It's brutal, with a touch of horror mixed in. Furthermore, the scene is great world building. Marcus is unfazed by the atrocity, implying that he's seen many such things before. It speaks of the prison being a corrupt, broken place, and that branches out to the broader world. Finally, after mounting tension, our heroes encounter their dreaded enemy, the Locusts. Already, we see the cinematic approach this game has to its battles. A raven is flying overhead and a watchtower crumbles. The Locusts emerge from the smoke of the debris. Marcus and Dom fight through the bloodied and harrowed prison as the player gets used to the game's controls. They make their way to the courtyard as something big rumbles underneath them. They manage to board the raven right in the nick of time. A corpser emerges from the earth. The monster is giant, easily dwarfing the chopper. Its appearance is a great way of finishing the introductory chapter. It communicates that this world is bigger than you, badder than you, and something that you will struggle to survive against. Marcus and Dom then link up with Delta Squad.
Where are we going?
Embry Square. Colonel Hoffman's waiting for us.
Hoffman. Oh, shit. This is gonna be awesome.
Hey! Are you the Marcus Phoenix? The one who fought at Aspio Fields?
Yep.
Wow. Cool!
Not really.
The story does a fantastic job of building intrigue around Marcus's character. He already has relationships with many of the characters prior to the player's introduction to him. He has a past that soldiers revere, and this contrasts with his status as a prisoner. Something happened to make him fall from grace. Furthermore, Marcus is very clearly unhappy to see Hoffman. All of these questions create an aura of intrigue around Marcus that makes him captivating. Hoffman is waiting for them at the LZ, and his disdain for Marcus compounds the questions about his past.
You! Traitor like you doesn't deserve to wear the uniform. Looks to me like you need all the help you can get.
Marcus's wry response is satisfying, and is also emblematic of his personality. Marcus Phoenix is a very bold character. You get a pretty strong sense of who he is after just a few lines of dialogue. He's courageous, but he's also hard-headed. He has a very cynical outlook on the world, and this comes through his wry and often cutting sense of humor. He has a strong distaste for authority, and he'll do what he thinks is right, regardless of what his superiors command. It's pretty apparent that this personality is what led him to a prison cell, one way or another. Although this rough, tough guy archetype is fairly common for this genre of story, Phoenix nonetheless stands out as one of gaming's best. His voice is magnetic, and just about every line out of his mouth is memorable. He's a prime example of how important execution is when it comes to characterization. A list of personality attributes is not what makes a character come alive. They come alive in the telling of the story. Hoffman brings good news, but in the Gears universe, nothing comes easy.
We now have the light mass bomb. I'll take out all these bastards with one shot. Up high! But it can't work if we don't have the targeting data. That's why we need the resonator.
A weapon to end the war. It sounds great, but in the midst of explosions and gunfire, and with Alpha Squad already missing, the retrieval of the resonators is setting out to be a difficult and brutal affair. Hoffman reluctantly accepts Phoenix's reinstatement. He needs every man at his disposal. Delta Squad heads towards Alpha's last known position. They fight Locust through the city, and it really showcases the bleakness of it all. Gears of War has a compelling atmosphere, and one of the reasons it works so well is because of how wholeheartedly the game commits to its dour and brutal aesthetic. There's nothing ornate about Gears' world. The buildings are short and stubby, built for sturdiness instead of aesthetics. The colors are washed out and grimy, and the game's heavy gore adds to the feel that you're wading through a war zone. The Xbox 360 generation of gaming is criticized for a lack of color, with many games having overly brown color schemes. Gears of War is one of the games that started that trend. However, I think this aesthetic works really well for this game because this muted color palette was deliberately chosen to have a specific effect on the player's mood. You're supposed to feel overwhelmed and oppressed by the colors. I think the main issue with this muted aesthetic, like pretty much any other trend, is that later developers copy it unthinkingly and put it into games where it doesn't quite fit. It leads to overuse and fatigue. The sense of oppression in the game is further enhanced by the game's dabbling in horror. Gears of War plays with pacing, creating slow moments between the chaos that often introduce elements of the unknown, such as pits that descend endlessly or new Locust introductions. It makes you feel like you don't understand the Locust, and it really sells them as a threat not only to your person, but an existential threat to humanity. Even the checkpoint noise adds to this growing sense of dread. When the checkpoint noise tolls, it doesn't feel like a success. It sounds like you're taking yet another step closer to the abyss. Delta Team manages to find a member of Alpha Squad, Augustus Cole, aka the Cole Train. He's alone against a squad of Locusts, yet he's unintimidated. In fact, he taunts the Locusts as you try to save his exposed behind. It's an introduction that summarizes his personality. He's a larger-than-life, ex-pro thrashball player with more energy and enthusiasm than anybody else in the game combined. He's another example of Gears' approach to characterization. The game has a knack for bold personalities that collide with one another. We'll see this again with an upcoming character. With Cole at their side, Delta Squad continues on. They find a Hammer of Dawn. It's an awesome weapon, both in power and concept. It's a designator that summons a laser from space to strike its target. Yeah, it's as cool as it sounds. It's the one true power trip weapon in the game. When you have a Hammer of Dawn, you finally feel like the odds are in your favor. Unfortunately, the weapon is situational. It can only be used outdoors, and when the satellites are overhead. And with that in mind, it's a bit inconvenient to be warring against an enemy that loves the underground. There's a moment here that I love between Marcus and Dom.
What's all this shit about Hoffman's operation and his resonator?
It'll map the underground network. Then we can find the Locust heart and rip it out.
First off, this scene shows the bond between them. Marcus doesn't trust Hoffman's opinion, so he asks his friend about the mission. Also, his answer of a cynical is my favorite. It does a lot of storytelling lifting for what's merely an utterance. It tells of his overall skepticism of the leadership, and it speaks to how he's heard the same old type of story time over time, and it's never led anywhere. It's an economy of storytelling moment that says a lot about him, but also a lot about the world. Delta receives a transmission from Alpha Squad.
Where the hell are you guys? Man!
Oh shit, man, where you been?
Delta Squad is in the House of Sovereigns. Over.
Well, that's great. We're pinned down by troikas on your rooftop. Over.
It's Damon Baird, another mainstay in the series. Already, we see hints of another bold personality, but I'll discuss him more in a second. Delta clears an evac zone for Baird and the rest of Alpha Team. It's a somber reunion, as Cole tells Baird about the death of one of their comrades. It's clear that death pervades this universe. The Gears are ambushed by Locust, and here we have the emergence of the game's primary antagonist, General Ram. And man, this is an iconic introduction. Ram saunters through the chaos, pointing out Kim. He savagely executes him. Without any words, it establishes exactly the type of character Ram is. He's a beast that revels in bloodshed. In the background, there is a woman speaking about the Locust's strategy. I'll talk more about her at the end of the game. With the leader of Delta's untimely death, and the Locust horde converging on the survivors, they seek shelter inside a tomb. Marcus contacts Control and discusses next steps. Anya directs them to a nearby courtyard for their best chances at escape. Baird immediately confronts Marcus and sizes him up. Baird, like the rest of the characters, has a very strong personality. He's a mechanical genius, but he's also vain. In addition, he's whiny, confrontational, and easily agitated. This makes him a fantastic foil against the rest of the squad. He contrasts well against the stoic natures of Dom and Marcus, as well as Cole's breezy and easygoing attitude. Despite his negative character traits, which generally come across as unlikable in games, I found myself really growing to like Baird. Maybe it's because the game is pretty self-aware of how annoying Baird can be, and he's often the butt of the joke for the rest of the squad. Marcus especially likes making fun of him, and his presence really makes the squad's dynamic gel together. The squad finds themselves hunted by a new Locust threat, a berserker. As I mentioned earlier, the game really plays with a horror tone here, amping up the tension before the squad encounters it. The fight with the berserker marks the end of Act 1. Traditional weapons won't hurt the beast, so Marcus has to lure it outside in order to use the Hammer of Dawn. It's not the most complex encounter in the world, with you just having to lead the berserker to breakable walls and dodge roll its charges. Nonetheless, it serves as a really good change of pace from fighting the traditional Locust horde. Furthermore, it serves as a suitable climax to the act. Once the berserker is taken care of, Marcus reconvenes with Control. With the resonator secure, Hoffman gives them new orders. They have a secondary target, and they are to deploy the resonator in the Lethia Imulsion factory. Baird is stressed about packing up before nightfall hits, and we'll soon see why. Marcus is promoted, and this offends Baird. Then to make things worse, Dom announces he has a plan, which Baird is further miffed by. It's funny to see how his ego is wounded because Dom came up with the plan instead of him, and it's something he won't drop.
I got an idea.
Oh, yeah? What is it, smart guy? Enough. Plan? What plan? You don't have a plan? You're just talking shit. Plan.
Just wait and see, asshole.
It's these sorts of dynamics which really make the squad come alive. The squad battles through the ruined city as dusk approaches. Now is a good time to dive more into the gameplay of Gears. Gameplay-wise, Gears of War is so close to perfect. There is a reason it popularizes an entire genre of shooters. Even so many years later, this game still stands ahead above most of its descendants. What makes Gears click so well isn't just one particular thing, but rather how each of the finer details of gameplay all work so well together. First off, there is just a crunchy and tactile feel to everything. Marcus has great mobility, with a powerful dodge roll and the ability to slide quickly into cover. However, there is still a great sense of momentum and weight to him. The way he enters cover with a decided thwack, and the way his body slams into the ground with each roll. This tactile feedback carries over to the weapons. All of them feel very crunchy and mechanical, with very satisfying clicks and clacks when you reload. The gore and dismemberment systems make them feel even more powerful. Your enemies, though, are far from pushovers. Even on easier difficulties, the Locusts have a lot of health and do pretty high damage. This has a notable impact on the game's flow. One of the common criticisms of third-person shooters is that they have a boring gameplay loop. Hug a piece of cover, and peek out and shoot until the enemy is dead. It's very passive and slow. In Gears, though, this isn't how fights play out. The Locusts are aggressive, yet they also know how to use cover. This means one of two things often happens. First, the aggressive Locusts charge and flush you out of position. Alternatively, the Locusts hide behind cover and poke at you. Because the drones have high health, shooting at them from behind cover is not super effective. In both of these cases, the game is encouraging you to change up position. You're encouraged to get good flanks on drones, which is a more effective way of taking them out. Then, because you're also being forced out of cover and turn, it results in an overall great sense of movement and flow to fights. Here is where level design plays a big factor. The combat zones throughout the game are specifically designed to foster this dynamic flank or B-flank type of gameplay. Emergence holes often spawn, which means Locust will come from a different direction, and you're therefore required to reposition once again. My point is that cover isn't merely passive protection. In Gears, it truly is your #1 strategic tool. What this means furthermore is that the game can really foster diversity in its fights by altering the map design. Changing up the positioning of cover and enemy emplacements such as turrets really does alter how you navigate certain combat encounters. One of the common criticisms I've heard about this game is its lack of enemy variety. On one hand, it's true. There are only a small handful of enemy types, with the drones, wretches, and boomers being the primary foes you fight. However, the variety created by the differing enemy compositions and map layouts made this so I didn't view the enemy variety as a problem. I didn't get sick of fighting the Locusts, and I always look forward to the next skirmish. There's room to grow in this area for certain, and this is something the sequels do address. There are smaller touches too, which really add to the gameplay experience. One of my favorites is the active reload system. When reloading your weapons, there's a meter with a perfect marker. If you time your reload well, you can reload faster than you otherwise would. If you time your reload perfectly, your weapon is temporarily powered up. However, if you mistime your reload, there's a jam animation that you need to wait for. The system is great for a number of reasons. First off, as the name suggests, the system makes reloading a more active action than just hitting a button. It makes you feel more connected to your weapon. Furthermore, because each weapon has a distinct timing window, it adds to the sense of identity each one has. Furthermore, the system adds a sense of mastery to weapons. Initially, you may mistime reloads or very rarely get a perfect reload. Then you may get perfect reloads consistently. After enough time with the weapon, you may not even need to look at the meter to gauge the timing. As a result, your DPS goes up, and it's a very rewarding way to feel like you're improving. Perhaps the best part is how it adds tension to the gunfights. If enemies are on you, you may try to get a perfect reload and mess up, jamming your weapon. It's a very cinematic sort of tension that adds to that feeling that you're playing out a scene from a movie, if that makes sense. The weapons, like the enemy variety, are few. However, their individual mechanics are varied and satisfying enough to not get stale for the length of a playthrough. Still, it's another area for growth. So in my mind, Gears' gameplay is nearly perfect. There is one huge flaw which we'll get to shortly. Let's get back to the story. After being prompted from Cole, Dom finally divulges his plan.
I could use a hand here. We gotta get out of here. Now if you got a plan, let's hear it.
I know somebody who lives out here. He's got a vehicle. It's a piece of crap junker, but it runs.
What? You know one of these stranded guys?
Yeah, there's a camp up ahead.
So what? You hang out with stranded?
I don't hang out, dickwad. I'm looking for somebody.
Shut up, Baird. Keep moving. What I said?
Dom is pretty cryptic about this person he's looking for. Like with Marcus, this touching on his backstory adds an air of mystery and depth to him. He has a life beyond the confines of the immediate story. Furthermore, this is setting up narrative elements which will be addressed in sequels. As I touched on in the intro, I appreciate the story's confidence in setting up narrative elements which will have payoffs much later on. They reach the stranded encampment. There is some great world building here. At the sight of the Gears, the stranded lock up their stores and homes. They have as much suspicion of the Gears as Baird has for them. It further builds the world as a place where humans are still divided, even in the midst of an existential threat. Dom calls in a favor and retrieves keys for the vehicle they need, but he and Marcus need to fetch it. They leave the others behind, ignoring the protestations of Baird. A new threat emerges pretty quickly: the Krill. They're bat-like creatures that prey upon humans in the dark, so Marcus and Dom have to remain near light sources in order to survive. This changes how you have to navigate the map. Oftentimes, areas are inaccessible until you blow up propane tanks littered around. This is a great example of the map variety I touched upon earlier. The change in the environment does change how you have to play. Unfortunately, this segment of the game also exposes its biggest flaw, which is why I waited until now to talk about it. The friendly AI in this game is pretty bad. Dom will actively walk into danger with the awareness of a weathered rock. Unfortunately, your allies have limited health, and if they go down, you have to revive them. Because they die in horrible spots, you often get killed having to run where they are. And this Krill segment is just the worst for this problem. In this playthrough I didn't get any good clips, but when playing this game in the past I had times where Dom ran into the dark and got killed by the krill over and over again, and because he was in the dark I couldn't run in to save him. This problem isn't quite frequent enough to be game ruining, but it happens often enough to be very frustrating. It's pretty much the only thing in the game that I feel like was a big oversight. The gears reach the vehicle and fuel it up. There's a segment where you drive on a highway, fending off krill with a UV light. It's another good change of pacing. Overall, the game has a really good feel for when to give players a break from the traditional cover-to-cover shooting. They return to the stranded camp, just in time to help the stranded against the Locust attack. After the enemy has been repelled, the gears finally move on to the mining facility, marking an end to Act 2. I love the atmosphere at the beginning of Act 3. The rain is heavy, and the lightning is so loud it sears your ears. These create an even more dour and ominous vibe than before. Unfortunately, the entrance to the facility is blocked, so the gears split up to find a way in. They encounter a new enemy, lambent wretches. These guys have a spookier look than the originals, with glowing mouths and they explode. Other than that, they're not too different to fight. The tension grows as they make their way around the abandoned facility with creepy screams arising.
You know that nobody's been underground in years, right?
I know.
Look, man, it's enemy territory. I mean, it's bad enough when we're fighting these things outside, in broad daylight. But underground? In the dark?
Yeah, could be bad. But hey, don't tell Baird that. He's scared shitless as it is.
This is another segment where the game employs horror tactics to put the player on edge. The gears really feel the tension too. They are uncomfortable with the idea of going underground. That is the Locust's playground, and they already struggle enough with them as it is. I love Marcus's matter-of-factness. Yeah, it could be bad, is such a nonchalant response, and he still sneaks in a way of making fun of Baird. The banter of Delta is what really sells the squad for me. They find a way inside, and they encounter a miner who is waiting for rescue. Unfortunately, the gears need his help. He is very reluctant to do so. He just wants to leave this place.
Relax, will ya?
You relax. You gears all suck. Bunch of bloodthirsty fascist pigs.
He is not a fan of the gears either. His dislike for them, along with the strandeds, helps paint a picture of the COG's overall reception. They are not very popular with the masses. Gears of War is really good at weaving world building into moments like these, hinting at the larger world without delving into too much exposition. Unfortunately, the miner is not long for this world. He falls into a pit and is eaten by wretches. Delta continues on without their guide. They make their way underground to the Imulsion mine. This is one of the most unique and interesting locations in the game. The glowing, bubbling pools of yellow emulsion make the mine a lot brighter than you would expect. The dark rocks contrast nicely with it and creates a nice color balance. The stalagmites and the stalactites are oppressively large. Their silhouettes stand out against the glowing liquid, and they resemble sharp teeth. I love the thematic unity here. The gears are descending into Locust home territory, and they are surrounded by imagery of the jaws of a beast. It just works well. Overall, the game has a surprising amount of variety to its environments, given the limited color palette it employs. The colors are muted, with browns and grays predominant, yet there is still a lot of expressiveness and variety to the environments. From the war-torn city, to the ominous and moody thunderstorm facility, to the predatory vibes of the Imulsion factory, Gears has a lot of its world to show you. A lot of games fall into one of two camps. Either there is so much visual variety that the world doesn't feel cohesive, or everything is so samey that it becomes boring. Gears of War's art direction finds the perfect middle ground. The world feels like a single cohesive whole. I'm always eager to visit the next area because I know something interesting and different awaits. The Gears' progress is quickly halted by the appearance of a corpser. This is the monster we saw in the game's opening, so it's a nice full circle moment to get to fight it here. The battle isn't anything too special. Shoot the belly to expose the mouth, then shoot the mouth. Wretches join the fray to give you more to contend with, but it's all overall still a simple affair. You finish the fight by forcing the corpser onto a platform, then shooting off its support hinges. The corpser plummets into the Imulsion. When they continue, even the Gears can't help being amazed by how much Imulsion is in the mine.
Look at all that juice. Hey, Marcus, how much do you think all that Imulsion's worth? I don't think I can count that high.
In addition to being pretty and visually interesting, the game is using the environments to foster world building. From the Gears' dialogue, it's clear that this emulsion is valuable, and this is reinforced by the giant refinement factory we had previously traveled through. The humans in Gears' world put a lot of resources into mining emulsion. They plant the resonator and escape the mine. A job well done, right?
What do you mean it didn't work?
I mean that lousy resonator didn't deliver the goods. According to Anya, we're missing data on, hell, I don't know, most of the network. We'd need 100 resonators to map these tunnels.
Fortunately though, Baird stumbles upon a geobot that has all of the targeting data they need. This does feel a little too coincidental and easy. However, the contrived nature of this plot point is offset by the intrigue of the geobot's origin. It came from the house of none other than Marcus's dad. It's an unexpected and interesting development, and it powers the story onward. Meanwhile, we see General Ram in the underground caverns, executing a COG soldier. He's still really intimidating, but I kept waiting for there to be a scene that fleshed him out a bit further. They head to the East Barricade Academy, where the Phoenix estate is. However, the squad has to ground the Raven due to Nemesis in flight. They make the rest of the journey on foot, fighting through Locust troops. This fourth act really cranks the combat to the next level, hitting you against higher concentrations of enemies. It feels like a solid progression given the player's increasing familiarity with the mechanics, and it syncs with the story's build-up. There's another berserker encounter which plays out like the first. You eventually lead it to a greenhouse, where there's an open roof. Since it's not an entirely open area like the first go-around, you have to bait the berserker into an open area to use the Hammer of Dawn. It's a good reuse of the mechanics while adding a little bit more difficulty, and it is another nice change of pace from the intense shooting of this act. The Gears eventually make it to the estate. Baird spots an APC behind the house, which they can use to exfil. It's broken down though, but he thinks he can fix it. Phoenix orders them to remain outside, getting the APC running, while he and Dom head into the mansion to search for intel. Inside, they're met with Locust drones. One thing I find interesting is that as they travel through the estate, Marcus doesn't really make any comments on his parents or childhood. He's not really a guy for nostalgia or reflection. They locate a hidden entrance to a secret lab. When Jack taps into the computer, they find something shocking.
Doesn't seem possible. There can't be these tunnels. It's a honeycomb. The planet's crust is riddled with them. They're everywhere.
I take it that qualifies as enough data to get the job done?
All Marcus is interested in is that they have their targeting data. There are still a lot of questions about his father. How did his dad get this data, and why is it holed up in a lab? These questions aren't answered in the game. Like the mystery person Dom is searching for, the game is teeing up mysteries for future titles to address. Delta holds out desperately as Jack uploads the data they need. They book it out of the mansion and just barely make it to their APC, with a Brumac in pursuit. They board the train, at the front of which sits the lightmass bomb. They must get the targeting data to it. Unfortunately, an entire train infested with Locust stand between them. I really like this setting. The sky is alien and ominous, with Nemesis ink blotting out the sunlight. This has story implications too. A berserker boards the train, but Delta can't use the Hammer of Dawn due to the obstructed sky. Instead, you can dispatch the berserker in a few ways. You can either lure it under a platform and detach it from the rest of the train, or you can lure it near fuel tanks and blow them up. I'm glad that for the third appearance of the berserker, the game forces you to do something different than just nuke it with the hammer again. They push through train cars, making their way past various obstacles, and the fighting is suitably intense. The developers managed to capture a very kinetic feel, with the train cars showering sparks, and it really adds a sense of movement and urgency as the story's climax approaches. At the front of the train, General Ram awaits. He is surrounded by Krill, and with the murky sky as his backdrop, he's never looked more intimidating. Unfortunately, looking cool has been General Ram's only shtick for the entire game. I feel like there's a missed opportunity to do more with him. The boss fight, although cinematic, is pretty underwhelming. He essentially just walks slowly at you and shoots you, sometimes dispatching the Krill to attack. That isn't to say the fighting is easy though. Dom sure loves to die in this fight, right next to Ram, forcing you to make some pretty stupid maneuvers to save him. That's when playing on an easier difficulty too. I've seen footage of this fight on Insane, and while that's certainly not something I would like to do. Despite Ram's challenge, the Gears manage to beat him and set off a lightmass bomb. The game ends pretty shortly thereafter. There isn't a resolution scene with the Gears. This feels fitting though. As we saw with Marcus at his father's estate, He's not a man for reflection. He gets the job done, and well, that's about it. As the Raven flies away, Hoffman gives a motivational speech about their success, so things seem to be ending on a very uplifting note.
This war has exacted a heavy price from others. It has torn our world apart. But you have my word that we will rise again.
However, this is undercut by the following speech. A woman speaks to the Locust, the same woman who spoke during Ram's introduction.
They do not understand. They do not know why we wage this war. Why we cannot stop. Will not stop. Why we will fight and fight and fight. Until we win. Or we die. And we are not dead yet.
Her speech is really interesting. She says the humans do not know why they fight, which adds a great level of intrigue to the Locust. Throughout the game, they have appeared to be bloodthirsty monsters, so the idea that more complex motivations compel them is really interesting. It's clear that this mysterious woman is an even greater threat than Ram. We'll come to know her as Queen Mira. Overall, I would say that the game's ending is great for the first entry in a series. It manages to be satisfying enough on its own, yet it leaves you with a ton of questions that make you hunger for a sequel. Who is Dom looking for? Why was Marcus in prison? What's up with his dad? What are the Locusts really fighting for? These are just a handful of questions that the story asks, yet leaves open for subsequent games. This first game created an ample foundation, with enough world building to create a rich and fully realized world, yet it left enough room for sequels to flourish in their own right. In summary then, Gears of War is one of those few games that feels like the true start of a franchise. Like the original Halo, it's a game that leaves you floored, yet also leaves you wondering about the greater world and larger story at play. Gears of War is certainly not a perfect game. There are issues with the AI mechanics, Ram could have been more developed, and the final fight was underwhelming. However, these flaws become so tiny and insignificant in comparison to the successes of the game. The story is interesting, with a cast of characters that truly burst through the screen, managing to feel both bombastic and alive. The world is fully realized through stellar art design and the great weaving of exposition throughout. Finally, the gameplay is a masterpiece, standing at the top of its class almost 20 years later, and virtually birthing an entire genre. It's one of those games I appreciate more and more as the years go by. It's one of those games, I think, that is immune to the effects of time, and it stands as one of the most influential in the medium's history. Thanks for watching. It means a lot that you made it all the way to the end. If you liked the video, please consider leaving a like or subscribing. It truly helps both the video and the channel. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the game or the franchise overall in the comments below. Lastly, I'm an author in addition to making YouTube videos. I have a science fiction post-apocalyptic series called the Northfield Saga. If you like Gears of War, I sincerely think you'd like my post-apocalyptic world. I have links to the books in the description. Even one sale or a review goes a long way, so I'd really appreciate your support. Either way, thanks again. Have a great rest of your day. Until next time.